and Publishing Conference. My name is Pooja Telakacharla, adjunct faculty in the publishing program. I'm extremely pleased to welcome you to this next session, not only because it includes our sole student presentation, but also because it includes some colleagues and friends from Johns Hopkins University Press here in the DC area. So we're starting this next talk called Advancing Inclusion and Eliminating Barriers to the Profession of Publishing. And I'd first like to welcome our first speaker, Nicole Zamudio-Román, a student at the George Washington University Program in Publishing, as well as Davida Breier and Diem with Johns Hopkins University Press. Nicole, why don't you get us started?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole, and today I'm going to be presenting more on disability and in the publishing workforce. Next slide. I forgot to say. Okay, so here I present some pictures of individuals some of you might recognize. And usually I like to start with a slide like this, and we'll go back to it. But for now, it's just to get some familiar faces out there for people. Next slide. And so putting this into perspective from the first slide, we want to start out by saying that given the research done by the 2015 Lee and Low Diversity in Publishing Survey, Porter Anderson, he's the editor-in-chief of Publishing Perspectives. He summed up the findings as just being diversity is not created equal. And with that, we can say that it seems like a pretty good way to put the data and everything, like it's a good way to sum it up because only 8% of the individuals in the industry identified as being disabled, and even fewer identified from other marginalizations. Now, such a small percentage represented the workforce's disabled employees at the time, and yet the common advice for those who pursued careers in publishing, and sometimes even now, for those who couldn't work in an office setting or afford to move for the job, is to freelance. And so, like the quote down below, the life of a freelancer is no life for those from marginalized communities wishing to enter the publishing workforce, particularly those that also have a disability, chronic illness, and or are neurodivergent. Next slide. Most times, especially starting out, work is comprised of low pay, long hours, and small odd jobs if freelanced that sometimes end in a percentage business cut. It no longer becomes a question of what can one do for the job and what can the job give in return, but how far is one willing to push and risk the boundaries of their health and limitations for the sake of satisfying others before your own well-being. Having little to no flexibility at the workplace in regards to accommodations and requiring a second or third job at the entry level to pay the bills is what keeps disabled, chronically ill, and neurodivergent folk more likely to be self-employed than non-disabled folk. And we can see from some of these percentages that I have listed in the PowerPoint presentation, some of the data of sometimes what keeps people from being able to move up, and also just how many people are chronically ill, disabled, and neurodivergent in the US. Now, when taking all of these percentages into perspective, such as how either 15% of the world's population are disabled, or how 48.3% of the US population have a chronic illness. Only 19% of people with disabilities in the US are employed. And for those that are employed, this tends to be a double-edged sword. And this goes looking at how the starting salaries as an editorial assistant in New York is $39,500. But moreover, on one hand, we can think that people have gotten their dream jobs. They're working their passion. They're doing what they can for their jobs. They're doing what they love. And yet, on the other hand, there's a lack of accessibility and acceptance to the point of long-term impacts on one's self-esteem, mental health, and even how one perceives their entire future. It's microaggressions where people refer to your days working from home as special treatment, or worse, days off. It's being told that working from home and therefore less visible in the office will hurt your career prospects. It's feeling more disabled by your manager's attitude than your own disability. Next slide, please. Now, Lee and Lowe revisited their diversity and publishing survey. They did another one, and saw tiny change from the employees identifying as disability. There was a 3% increase. So from the 8%, it went to the 11%. This time they also ran one for interns. It became 22% that identified as having a disability. So it took a pandemic to slightly change the way the world views the rationale that remote work would be the way to go. Up until the pandemic, hiring managers never thought to question their hiring practices about a candidate's qualifications of when an individual couldn't commute to the office, couldn't move, why these just things could not be, and so on. Prior to the pandemic, we could have accommodated something like this with a video conference. It's not like Skype wasn't available at the time. They are incredibly useful and vital to connecting, and we've learned since then about just how important they are. Hopefully, they will continue to be used and not just thought of as optional accommodations. And the percent of disabled folk in publishing post entering the pandemic is on the rise, though slowly. It's increasing. And even though it's small, we have to recognize that in this industry, work still needs to be done. Next slide, please. So looking forward, the publishing industry must work to improve the way it values its disabled, chronically ill, neurodivergent, and marginalized staff. Disabled, chronically ill, and neurodivergent folk are more than their condition. So we looked to the very first slide, and in our very first slide, we saw some familiar faces. And in those familiar faces, we probably saw people we recognize. We probably saw Prince, we saw Albert Einstein. And in thinking of that, we have to think, could these people be someone that we could have in the office? Because we all know these people do great things. There are people that we love. There are people we've come to admire, but they could be people we come to admire in our workplace too. And this is why we have to see past what should stay between a doctor and a patient. And it's also about remembering that at any time, at any given day, anyone could become disabled, chronically ill, and neurodivergent. Leaders, like managers, need to lead in a way that is beneficial for everyone. This is leading by example. This is leading with empathy. And it's super important to allow room for growth and to have realistic, attainable expectations of their employees. We need to normalize disability and mental health awareness training for every publishing staff member, because with education comes the greatest change. And with that, we need to think about how listening, empathizing, and then acting can be the greatest way to bring self-change, like not just training, like professional training brought to the office, but also just ourselves. We need to think about being better listeners, empathizing with others, which is something that tends to be skipped over, and coming to understand what others feel, and why they feel what they feel, why they ask for what they ask for, and not just assuming things about other people and then acting on what has been said to us, why people are asking for what they are asking for. And sometimes it's not about the whys. The whys are not important. It shouldn't matter, because sometimes what people need, needs need to be met, and things are just matter of fact. And this is why publishing needs to work to publish more works by, about, and featuring disabled, chronically ill, and neurodivergent folk. There's only a 3.4% of children's and young adult books that have characters with disabilities in them. And for this reason, the more that people are exposed to characters and such with books of characters that have disabilities in them, the more they learn to empathize with these characters. And the more, if children read them, they can grow up empathizing more with said characters and said people in real life. Moving forward, we should learn to normalize remote work continuously without any strings attached, and same thing with accommodations, without question, especially if the pay and benefits of the job isn't enough to sustain an individual just doing that one job. We can avoid burnout, which is something that has long-termly been normalized in this industry, and has long-term been normalized in this industry to the point where people have just worked themselves tired, and not everyone can do that. And it's understanding that people aren't machines, and that we need to learn to understand why people need to be more appreciated for who they are and what they have to offer, rather than thinking that we have to appreciate profit other than people. We should also learn to not have to verbally disclose any sort of disability to people. we should have some sort of portal or something now that we're in the third decade of the 21st century. And have that be our way of communicating these things. There shouldn't be some sort of awkward conversation, potential questioning, confrontation sort of thing that goes on. We're past that. And leading up to that, we need to unlearn age-old misinformation and myths that allow for toxic workplace culture to persist. It's not about how folks with disabilities can potentially hinder others around them from their work to be done or so on, but rather how their educational skills and contributions can better the business. It's about making these negative thoughts into a positive. And so hiring practices now need to reflect the diverse products that are being produced, because like some of like the I was told a quote by Diem that was that you can't have diversity without disability. And I think that that is truly where we should stand with our hiring processes and with our employment moving forward, because that is just the truth. That is the matter of fact. And so that's it. Thank you.
Nicole, thank you so much for articulating both statistical information and your own personal experiences and observations. Your commentary has elicited, I just want you to know, a really rich discussion on the external board, talking specifically, as Casey points out, that the pandemic feels like one of the biggest positive shakeups on the job market since World War II and the bubonic plague. And you've done a really great job of bringing that into your presentation. One other thing, just as a segue to our next set of speakers, is a segue backward in time. One of the conference featured Simon Holt, who self-identifies as legally blind. And he started his presentation by saying that he didn't just want to have a job, but he wanted to flourish in a career. Not just despite his disability, but as a new way of approaching his world. So you've done a great job of connecting those two pieces. So thank you again for participating in the conference. If there are questions specifically for Nicole, please do put them in the interact button, and we'll get to them at the end of the talk. I'd like to now introduce Davida Breier and Diem Bloom from Johns Hopkins University Press. Davida, Diem, why don't you take it from here? Diem, you need to unmute yourself. Both you and Davida are muted. There we go.
Got it. Sorry about that. So I'm Diem, and what I was trying to say was that our presentation, Intersectional Inclusion, our FLI-Centered approach to diversifying internships, is something that is that we're both doing professionally, and something that is also very personal to the two of us. And it's a bit of serendipity because we only started working together earlier this year, but we came up with the idea of doing an internship at the same time. And so in joining forces, we've put this together. So next slide. So just defining terms at first. So first generation refers to first generation college students. So this is where your parents or your guardians didn't complete a four-year college. And so this being the first in your family, in many ways, sort of getting that type of education. And then limited income, there's the definition for it based on the federal poverty limit and the assistance. And the key thing about this is that when Davida and I were first talking about putting an internship together, one of the things that we discovered is we both identified as first generation limited income. And that sort of made for a really interesting conversation about what we could do based on that fact. So next slide. So the key thing, I think, is that diversity, as you can see from the presentation that Nicole did, we saw the same survey and the same results and agreed. I think that's been our experience in publishing. And so a lot of our conversation at the beginning was really around class and economics. And again, something where we were both coming from that type of experience. And we also both in common didn't have internships when we were at that age. And so looking at wondering why we didn't do that and why we were now thinking about starting up an internship program. So next slide. The numbers that you see here are the same ones that Nicole referenced in her earlier slide. It's from the diversity baseline survey. And the interesting thing about this is that Davida and I work in academic publishing, and these numbers have actually gotten worse since the survey 1.0 for academic publishing. But the sort of important thing that we wanted to bring up here was that while these numbers reflect, I think, what we've seen, what we've also seen is that there is diversity in publishing, but it doesn't exist necessarily in these in the job levels that were listed. So I think a lot of times where we've seen diversity from our experience, we've seen it in the production departments, in the mailroom, in suppliers we've worked with, in the manufacturing companies that we've worked with, customer service, accounting, technology. And these are all viable career options in the publishing industry that weren't counted on this. And so what we decided to do was focus on that last one, interns. Next slide.
So what we wanted to do was really take a look at what internships looked like, what they offered, and what barriers were in place, because very often internships were just cookie cuttered. They were done the same way year after year, place after place, and there wasn't a lot of thought put into who they were excluding. So, we knew that an internship could and should provide, a workplace experience, skill development, opportunities to network and make connections, teach interns about the industry, and really give that information. So that was all good. But what we found was that in many ways, they had inherent barriers, and we set about trying to dismantle those. Internships often traditionally weren't paid. They would require transportation to be on site. They might require living somewhere other than where the person, resided. They often were not very flexible because interns, especially, low-income interns, would have another job. You'd have to know about an internship often to apply for one. And in many cases, you approach something and think, well, but that's not meant for me. And you go about looking at other ways to do things. Next slide, please. So as Diem and I were initially thinking about an internship program and also then finding out we wanted to work on this together, we also thought about the strategic plan that we are working under here at the press. And in that strategic plan, there are two key components. The vision, in which we envision a future where knowledge enriches the lives of every person, and then a core part of the value. And that encompasses every part of our strategic plan at every level is equity, justice, and inclusion. we're tasked with actively dismantling the barriers to equity, justice, and inclusion. And so that brought us to where we wanted to develop this new program. Next slide, please. So in our internship charter, we identified those problems, those barriers. We also went out and, although we had some personal experience, we certainly didn't speak to all experiences. We spoke to experts that work with interns. We spoke with, career counselors at colleges. We spoke to, some deans at a local college to get some insight into what not only we should offer, but what we could offer. We did find that there were things that we hadn't necessarily considered, and they all became part of what our charter was. We removed the prerequisites that often bar first-generation low-income students. We made certain that the internships were paid. We also wanted to make sure that we looked at this as a business of publishing opportunity, not just acquisitions and marketing, as we found many other internships offered. We really wanted to open this up so that anyone interested in publishing in any aspect, and there are many more than we often see in internships, had that opportunity. We wanted to make sure that the work was meaningful. We didn't want to create a clerical position where an intern finished and really knew only one small busy work aspect of publishing. And we wanted to create an internship program that envisioned future support from the very start. So with this, we looked at those opportunities, and we also realized that in doing this program, we could also provide these same types of opportunities to our own staff. And so anything we're doing for our internship program, we're also opening up to anyone at the press that wishes to expresses an interest or wishes to attend certain meetings that we're holding. This is a development opportunity, both in information sharing, but also inviting staff to actively participate. It becomes a development opportunity for staff to act as mentors, as leaders, as instructors, and make us better as a whole. So by allowing the interns access to all these different aspects of our business, we're also trying to create some new inroads for the interns. We hope that they will stay connected to the press and to future cohorts, and that they will continue networking and helping us with feedback on program development.
And Davida, I just wanted to add a couple of things too. So in going out to other groups to get a broader sense of what we could add to our internship, because again, you're looking at two people who didn't have internships, so some of it was guessing on our end. There were some interesting comments that came our way. I mean, for example, we talked to a nonprofit that works a lot with first-generation limited income students. And one of the questions we posed was, how do we go about doing a diverse internship? And one of the comments they sort of sent to us is like, your internship doesn't have to be different from your non-diverse internship. One way to approach it might be, who do you prioritize in what you bring in? And that's where we looked at some of those problems, the way that that for us, specifically first-generation limited income students, the barriers for them to even know about or apply to an internship. So that's where we looked at that. When we talked to some of the colleges, another interesting perspective that we got as well was we were talking to one of the HBCUs, and the comment that came from that was, why would any of our students want to be in your internship? And so we really had to start and think about that as well in terms of what were we really offering for underrepresented people, or however we were going to define it. What were we going to offer that was different and meaningful? And then a question I think that we sort of came up with from our own experience in publishing was the whole concept of, great, we can recruit people, we can bring people in, how do we keep them? What do we do about the environment in order to retain the limited diversity we already have? So those were some of the ideas that went into this program charter when we started.
And we were challenged early on. What kind of environment were we creating? What were we going to offer, and what were we going to do to make sure that the internship environment was a safe space, welcoming, and that students would want to participate? Next slide, please. So again, we know full well that an internship program is not going to solve these problems. These problems have been here for a very long time. And this is something that we acknowledge, and that we know that this at least is a start. And we have a little bit more about what we consider, future hopes. But ultimately, the benefits that we came up with, the objectives we came up with, was that we wanted interns and also our staff to really understand and value our publishing mission. We also, again, want interns and staff to understand not just what we do and how we do it, but why we do it, and how that fits in with the larger EJI initiatives now and in future. So yeah, we had kind of an ambitious, heady idea for what we were going to try to do. Next slide. So that brought us to an application process and the FLI focus of how we would post the applications, how we would screen, and how we would ultimately decide. This is also where I learned about Diem's great love of pivot tables. One of the things that we found was that hiring outside of our university had a layer of HR bureaucracy we hadn't imagined. And we were given a choice to do something that would take longer and we wouldn't get started. And we thought about the effect the pandemic had on, and especially, people who were struggling, that many opportunities disappeared when we went remote and there were no longer on-site offerings. We were given an easy opportunity to use the structure of the Hopkins student hiring system, which narrowed the reach of our program, but allowed us to get started right away. And deciding that working on this sooner rather than later was really in the best interest of the interns, we went ahead and jumped right in. Next slide. Which was the slide I actually thought I was looking at. So sorry. Smile is our internal student employment site. And this is where we ended up posting the internship position. It's also where we will be held accountable to making sure that the internships are as robust as they really should be.
And I think one of the important things too is that whatever sort of ideas we had at the beginning about how ambitious we might be able to do this, or bring in and really support the first generation limited income students in the community, in focusing on first generation limited income students at Hopkins, we are already focusing on a select group of people who are getting a lot of support in other ways from the university, who've had, obviously have been vetted at a certain level, who were able to get into this school, who were sort of in touch with this program. So that's part of, I think, something that we realize as well, is that whatever we do with this first year at the internship program, we're not reaching everybody. We've got sort of a very cherry-picked group that we're working with. who are actually game to helping us with doing this inaugural internship year with 2 people who haven't had internships before and are trying to figure out what we're doing along the way.
And we disclosed that from the beginning.
Yes.
In the interviews that we were going to lean on them for feedback. Next slide, please. When we developed the job description that was posted to the FLI network, to our internal sites, and to the job site, it was also shared with the writing seminars. We wanted that to be as inclusive as possible. We're not going to read through everything, but it would come back during the interviews that our attempt to be inclusive resonated with many of our final candidates. And the fact that we had no barriers, that we were looking for all types of people, the extroverts and the introverts, business people and English majors. So we put a very broad net out to welcome anyone in who truly wanted to learn about publishing.
And I think we got applications, interestingly enough, from all the different graduate programs. So, we got people in there from the computer science program, from the business school. I think there was a doctor who also applied for an internship as well. So that was really interesting to get people who were who I think otherwise just wouldn't have been interested in this, except for the fact that we put some key terms in there about what we were looking for and what we were hoping to do, and specifically calling things out like first generation limited income students. Next slide.
So for the application process, again, we specified that we were giving priority to first generation limited income students. And what we asked for was fairly simple: preferred name, pronouns, self-identification as a first generation or limited income student, equipment needs, software training needs, a brief personal statement. I mean, we really wanted to know why did they want this internship? What was important to them about publishing or learning, or, what did they seek? And a sample of work. That sample of work could be anything. We just asked it be something they were proud of. And we received papers, we received artwork, we received poetry. It ran the gamut, but again, we wanted something that represented something the student was proud of.
The key thing there was we weren't asking for them to create something new, just for us. And it was really up to them to sort of make that selection in terms of what they wanted to share with us. And so we were hoping, in the way that we wrote the description, I thought it was really nice sort of how open these applications were, how very personal they were as well in terms of the things that people submitted.
In thinking about our own experiences, in thinking about what we learned from some of the internship experts, the career counselors we spoke to, we decided to, anything that was not a necessity, we eliminated. We did not require a specific major or area of study. We did not require that they be a junior or senior. We did not require a minimum GPA. That was in fact something that we learned from one of the people we spoke with, was that many very good candidates who sincerely need an internship are eliminated because they're working 1 or 2 jobs while they're in school, and their GPA maybe does not truly reflect how hard they work because they're juggling so many responsibilities. We did not require a resume because, again, if you've, that may be something that you don't have the experience in producing. We didn't require specific work or industry experience or personal or professional references. Again, getting that letter means you have to be connected to someone who's going to be able to help you along this path. We were very clear that we would be flexible about scheduling. We were not insisting people be somewhere at any point in time knowing they had other requirements and possibly other jobs. also realized too, and harkening back to Nicole's presentation, we did not require any type of on-site participation. We made this open that if you were interested in this program, but you had a reason that, being on site for disability reasons, for neurodivergent reasons, for any reason that might mean that you would do better in a remote setting, but you fully wanted to participate, we made that a possibility. Anything else, Diem?
No, next slide.
Okay.
So now we get into the numbers. So we posted the application, or we had the posting up over the summer in between semesters for a very short period of time. So we were actually kind of surprised at the number of applications we did get, 55 plus, because we were still getting applications after we had closed it down. But then if you remember from the earlier slide, we mentioned that we had 2 extra things that we had asked for, was the personal statement of work, just the personal statement, and then a sample of their work. And so that narrowed it down to 21 sets of completed applications. And for us, that was a way to sort of weed out people who were not necessarily interested in this internship program, but also to get something where we would have a chance to look at the applicant beyond just the statistical and information that was filled out in the standard form. From there, we interviewed 10 people. And again, we did this not on our own. So you're just seeing the 2 of us, but we have dozens of colleagues at Hopkins who volunteered their time and energy to help us work through this. And then from the interview process, we made 7 offers. We were originally only planning for 5, but we had 7 really good candidates, and through the generosity of our director, she allowed us to add in 2 more people. And within 24 hours, we got 7 acceptances. So that's how we ended up with 7 interns. Next slide. So more numbers. And again, because we didn't make certain requirements, and one of them being a certain class year, because one of the things that when we had talked to the internship experts out there was the question that sometimes people were limited in that they had to have been in school for a certain amount of time, or sometimes the internships were really just only focused towards undergraduates, and not putting that in. It was very interesting in terms of the mix of people that came in. So surprisingly, we got a number of people from the graduate programs. And again, all the different graduate schools. So like I said, we got people from medicine, we got people from computer science, we got people from the business school. And we also got a couple of first year applicants, which is really interesting because again, this is the summer before they've started college. So it was interesting that they got that information and went ahead and applied. And I think in talking to them afterwards, a lot of it was they felt encouraged, I think, by our description about what we were looking for. We also asked for pronouns on our separate application form, and this is just the breakdown that we got. So already you're seeing a difference from the makeup of what the industry looks like. And again, nothing planned. We obviously did not ask anyone to identify sex or gender in terms of excluding anyone, but this is what came forward. Next slide. We did ask people to self-identify as first generation or limited income. And again, the difference in going through the Hopkins portal was there was a section on there where people could mark if they were work study or not. And it was interesting because sometimes those work study numbers didn't necessarily match up exactly to the limited income. So it was interesting to see who was self-identifying as first generation and limited income. And then many people did not select that. Though it turned out later when we were looking closer at the applications, many of those were work study students as well. So, but the key thing here is when you look at the intersection, I think one of the things that we had sort of in our discussion at the beginning was the whole idea of, if you look at race, if you look at gender, if you look at disability, you can have diversity in those areas, but you may still get similar applicants from the same educational background, from the same experiences, from the same set of Ivy League and Seven Sister schools that publishers often sort of recruit their interns from. You get people who sort of are knowledgeable and connected into the publishing industry to get into those internships. And so what was really, what we sort of, our gut feeling was, if we remove the barriers that impact first generation and limited income students and really open it up, what we'll find, and sort of what we have seen in our own experiences and in our own lives, is there's a great deal of intersection there. And so we found that in our applicants as well. We found that all the first generation limited income students pretty much they were one or the other, and very often both. Next slide. So another sort of, this slide is about our process and what we did for the interview. And again, it wasn't just the two of us. We actually had a team of interviewers volunteer, and they were from all different job levels. So we had people on the team who actually have never managed people, have never hired people, have never actually interviewed anyone before. And as part of what we were talking about before, where we're looking at this internship not just for what can we do for outside interns that we bring in, but what can we do for people that are already here in our press. We looked at it very much as a way to sort of model and encourage collaborative leadership and give people development opportunities. So in the end, our lead interviewers were primarily the people who had never interviewed anyone before in their lives, and they did an amazing job. We also had to come up with how we were going to determine who to interview. So we came up with this first sort of quick pass of, based on reading the full applications, if someone we wanted to bring in or not. And then what we did after that was playing on the idea of how to prioritize first generation limited income students. What we did there was we found a way to sort of, based on that rankings, make sure that we got those people in. And we also did the calls via video calls. We had a standard set of questions. And what was really interesting as well was the things that came out during the interviews. This is where we found people really disclosing things like disability and orientation and things like that we didn't ask for. So next slide. So staff culture and development, again, this goes to where we want to make sure that we are building a welcoming environment for the interns to come into. So next slide. This is just an indication of where we got people from. So basically all different areas of the business and different types of jobs. And what was really interesting there was how many people then were also disclosing to us that they were also either first generation or limited income as well. Next slide. And so this is where, again, in bringing everyone in, we were looking for ways to have the rest of the staff participate. The key thing here, though, is the one at the bottom, where what we did with all of our teams was have them routinely ask the question about anything that we were putting together for the programming. Is it equitable, just, and inclusive? And if the answer was no, or not quite, then the next one was there anything we could do about it? Next slide. And this is just to give you a rough idea, again, sort of administratively, the types of things that we were coming together for work assignments. And the key thing in there was in looking at making sure we have in-person and remote options for these things. Davida, do you want to go next?
Next slide. So the interns. So we finally, we made our selections. We had our 7, and we had our first intern cohort. Next slide, please. This is us on our orientation day, where we were explaining the program and where we were going and getting them set up to go. Next slide, please. The way we plan on doing this is to give them a full and rounded experience so that they get a kind of a flavor of all of our 4 business divisions, with making sure we're also including the overall press, our IT group, our finance group, that we're pairing fall and spring semesters with books and HFS in the fall, journals and project news in the spring, and developing those work experiences, the projects, and ultimately a project that they will develop through the course of the program, but bringing them through all of the different business divisions. Next slide, please. So the way this breaks down is that we roughly expect them to be working 67% of the time, learning 23% of the time, and working on a project 10% of the time. So that this is holding us accountable to make sure that we are teaching, that we are showing them all different aspects and working to create overviews that are recorded and then shared with the rest of the press if that's something that is useful in other staff members' career growth. The group project will have an EJI theme, and that is something we're still developing in conjunction with our teammates through the press and with the interns. Next slide.
In other words, we don't know what the project is yet, but we will soon.
Or projects.
That's right.
So the way this has landed now is that we are offering this program across all the business areas. We have everything set up where we kind of have what we really were hoping for, at least to start. And I think we're pretty happy with where things stand, but we want to do more. And we know that tomorrow, what we're looking for is opening this up to the larger Baltimore City community. We would love to partner with additional organizations. I mean, one of the things that we thought about early on was, do these need to be college students? Anybody interested in publishing might be interested in an internship program like this, because it traditionally was often an apprenticeship program. You came in and you got experience to work in publishing. We want to focus on making sure the communication continues with our cohorts and their mentors here at the press. And we also want to know what we did that worked and what didn't. We're looking for that direct feedback, because this is a work in progress, and we know that we will continue to refine it. Diem?
Next slide. So our lessons learned. So if you want to, next slide as well. So again, we didn't start out looking to prioritize race, gender, orientation, disability. And I call those out specifically because those are the ones called out in that publishing survey. But we got it. And we also In addition to that, got people of different nationalities. We also, for our internship, we have students from every year. So we have freshmen, sophomore, junior, et cetera, in there. But a couple of things that we really learned, and I think one thing is this is hard work. It's a lot of work. And again, the idea there is that we're not starting from an equitable, just, and inclusive space. So it's a lot of work to go against that, or to get past that, or to ask that question each time and rethink how you're doing things. I think another thing we also really got from this is doing any EJI sort of projects. That's a huge change for any organization, regardless of how progressive or supportive that organization is. And so it's going to require a lot of change management. We also could not have done this alone, and we shouldn't be doing this alone. So in order to be sustainable and have it continue beyond us and be better than what the two of us could do, we managed to get dozens of people interested in helping us, and we hope that many more will do so now that they are starting to see what's happening out there and they're seeing interns come in. And the other thing too is also, we've been talking a little bit about things that we haven't done, what we'd like to do, but it's always good to put it into perspective, because spring of this year, we had no internship program. We had 0 interns, and now we have 7 interns. And it's not the most perfect program out there. It's not I think it's the best program. We'll wait and see. But we've got something really great, and it's the start of something much bigger. And I think that's what's really important for us. Next slide.
I just want to add to, the stone stoop method of Diem and I getting this started. There's no way this we wouldn't be where we are without the whole of the press internship team and people who aren't even on the team who are participating. So it really did take the whole of the press to uplift this program and make it happen.
And thank you very much.
I'm so moved by this entire presentation, not just for their cohesion, but for what you ended on, which is that you went from 0 to 7 interns. And this really dovetails with what Barbara Klein-Pope, also at Hopkins, who was part of our conference last year, talked about creating a culture of equity, justice, and inclusion. You've not only created the culture, but you've taken it to the place where it's actually making a change. And there haven't been any formal questions posed here, but I just wanted to read a couple of comments from the kind of external group, was folks saying that they really wish that there was a program like this during their academic career, which I'm sure a lot of people also feel. I was a paid intern, but I would have loved something that was formally structured to really develop people's skills in publishing, rather than kind of fling us in to start working on editorial manuscript transmittals. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you're really taking it a step further. One other comment from Jocelyn Dawson, who's part of the University Press community as well, saying that it's really helpful to see the process details in how you've developed all of this. Specifically, one thing that stood out for me was that you're training the folks doing the interviews. You're specifically picking members of your staff who don't have experience managing people or haven't had the experience doing the interviews. So you're actually kind of diversifying the skill set amongst the people who are already in the organization, and not just for the folks who want to enter in as part of their development. So you've not left any stones unturned, and it's commendable and it's brave, and I know it's a lot of hard work. So thank you for doing it, and certainly thank you for sharing it with this presentation, because I like an ethics conference that talks about what we want, but it's even more juicy and exciting to see what people are doing to get what we want and to really further it along. So Davida, Diem, Nicole, thank you so much for everything that you've shared in this talk and for being part of this. We hope to learn more about your internship program. Maybe next year you can let us know how it's going, how it's developed, what other organizations you're partnering with. And again, thank you so much for everything you've brought to this conference today. With that, I'm going to invite everyone to stick around at 4:15 Eastern time. We've got our final closing plenary for day 2, and we're going to talk, I think, pretty candidly about pay equity. So what happens after your internship? What happens when you leave a place like Hopkins and you have a lot of experience in the business department or in operations, and you start to go into the workforce? So please join us for that, and thanks again for being here.